Welcome everybody, thank you for joining us for another episode from our 2024 EMTB Shootout Series, sponsored by Schwalbe Tires and Fox Racing. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Polygon Collosus N8E. This is part of our larger shootout, which had over a dozen bikes, and this bike was actually part of our sub $6,000 price category. Rob, why don't you lead away some of the features on this bike?
Yeah, so this is a 160 29-inch wheeled enduro e-bike, Shimano EP801 drive unit with a 630 watt-hour Shimano battery, full Shimano XT drivetrain and brakes, 203mm rotors on both ends, 12-speed drivetrain.
Pretty impressive for a $49.99 price point.
Yes, indeed. Fairly high quality frame as well, using their IFS 6 6-bar design for the suspension to give them the suspension performance that they wanted without impacting the motor. Got a really nice and short chainstay on it for a long travel e-bike as well, which definitely adds to the agility on the trail, I would say.
Definitely. Fox Float X2 and a Fox 38 fork up front. So all in all, a pretty competent spec. 170 Trans-X dropper, I'd say, would be one area we did talk about. But again, for under $5,000, I think you could go ahead and spend that extra little bit of money and get yourself a dropper. Absolutely.
And then rounding out the spec is the Polygon's in-house Entity brand with a fairly basic alloy cockpit on there and a nice and burly 35mm inner width rim laced with a set of Shimano hubs.
Also, riders who are looking to travel or be able to charge the battery out of the bike will be happy to note it is easily removable here under this cover. Like most of the bikes in our shootout, this is a size large, which we believe has a pretty good balanced geospec for the category of bike. Check out that info sheet, and of course visit theloamwolf.com for the full e-bike shootout series, and also check out all the spec numbers. But we'll talk a little bit about what those numbers mean in terms of performance on the trail, along with the components and that suspension package. So let's hit the dirt and see how this thing stacks up.
So we just finished climbing on the Polygon Colossus here. Pretty compliant rear end. It really grabs traction in a lot of it. I did notice on some of the very notchy kind of step-up climbs, maybe getting hung up a little bit, but it is ultra slick, so can't really put that all on the bike. So the EP801 motor on this is fairly quiet. I think it's probably middle of the pack in noise, but you really don't notice it while you're climbing, and great torque delivery. Again, huge update to the motor with this new version, and I really like it. It's caught up a lot in the torque delivery.
What were your thoughts on the climbing?
Yeah, fine. Like, I don't think any of these e-bikes feel terrible to climb. Like, the motors do really help to level out the field in terms of, you know, you still feel like you're being pushed up the hill by a 600 watt motor. But yeah, the overall feeling of, I guess, the geometry, the weight, the suspension platform does make it feel a little bit heavier overall. So for more dynamic movements, I think it is a little bit more difficult to move around. But overall, it's comfortable, and it gets you up the hill.
Okay. Yeah. To me, there was no major negatives or drawbacks. Nothing really jumped out either. I thought just it was good traction, pretty comfortable seated climbing position for the most part, and yeah, it got me where I wanted to go, and I was able to clean everything that I thought I could and should be able to clean on the way up. So yeah, no real negatives there.
I did have a couple of times where, especially on the very steepest stuff, when you're in the easiest gear, I did find that the front end wanted to lift a little bit. The rear end on this is quite short. The seat angle is not the steepest either. So yeah, for me, with my long legs ending up quite far off the back, out the rear wheel, that was a couple of times just when you're, you know, on a very steep bit of hill, not necessarily technical, but just trying to, you know, balance that traction and keeping the weight down on the front. I was struggling a little bit for that.
Interesting. You bring up, right, you got much longer legs, but I thought bikes like the Propane, also a Pete test bike, right, which will be coming out next, I could not keep the front end of that thing down.
Yeah. Okay. But this I had no problem with. Yeah. But you know, your body's different than mine. So.
Yeah. Maybe if you're in the longer legged camp like me, it's worth paying attention to seat tube angles, especially actual and effective. This effective seat tube angle, the one that Polygon will quote in their geometry table, isn't super slack, but once you get a slacker effective seat tube angle, actual seat tube angle, sorry, at taller leg heights, you get pushed off the back of the bike more. So that was the small drawback, otherwise it's fine overall.
Okay. Moving into nimbleness, descending, general trail riding nature, where do you think that's at?
Mid-pack is not, I don't think it's super sluggish, but it's also not an incredibly stable machine. Short rear end, not super slack head tube angle, do definitely contribute to increasing agility for the tighter bits of trail. It's a fairly long reach of 490mm for our test group, this size large, but I didn't find that it felt necessarily all that long most of the time. Yeah, middle of the pack, suspension performance felt decent, just nothing, yeah, it didn't blow me away at any point, but definitely a comfortable bike overall. Would you agree?
I think so. The low stack height helps, I think, a little bit with that longer reach for me. Kind of kept me up centered over the front wheel on the berms, felt pretty good. I do feel like even with the shorter rear end and the steeper head tube angle, I didn't feel like it was the most nimble and agile bike in the shootout for the numbers that it's displaying. But that might be better with $200 more of, you know, factory suspension. So I definitely would spend that money. Like you said, to me, it was right in the middle of the pack. Nothing really stood out or was a huge negative. It just didn't feel like the most alive bike to me.
I was fairly happy with the bike overall, especially considering the value aspect of it. It is heavy and the reach is a little long. So there were some things, right? Like we'd set up for a shot, you know, I'm like, oh, let's get this little jump thing. And I'm thinking about that one that we did earlier, like that right to the left kind of hip jump. And I was like coming into it, I'm like, oh man, maybe this wasn't the best thing to pick for this bike because it's kind of heavy and like you said, it's not the sprightliest bike. But then as soon as I just committed to yanking and pulling, the bike did what I wanted to do. I was kind of able to throw a little, you know, old man style into that thing. And I was like, okay.
But you did have to yank and pull.
I did have to.
Yeah, it doesn't naturally.
Notably.
Correct.
It is not.
But there are some bikes where I yank and pull the pole,
It
and
still
it doesn't
come
do
off
what
the
I want
ground.
it to do. Right? So like this bike, it still does what I wanted to do. And maybe that's just because that bike had so much more travel, right? But like this bike, you could still do what you wanted, but you just had to use a little bit more effort and energy to do it. And again, at this price, I feel like you upgrade the wheel set down the road, you upgrade the bar and stem, maybe a dropper post, and all of a sudden you can start shaving off a little bit of weight here and there. And I think that would do wonders for it. But I think this platform is more of a ground and pound kind of a bike.
Yeah.
To me, you know, the spec, XT brakes, the suspension, it has the, you know, the Shimano display and control that I prefer.
Yeah.
I think it's a sweet bike and a good, I would say aggressive all mountain enduro kind of a bike for someone who maybe doesn't live for popping off all the little tiny small hits, maybe like bigger jumps, big lips, or you want to charge and pound some really gnarly chunky terrain. That's going to be, I think, the ideal consumer for this bike. But killer price, killer value, it works, it holds up, and overall I think I'm pretty stoked on it. So that's it.
Cool.
Okay. Well, thank you guys very much for watching and sticking with us through the EMTB Shootout series. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you have any questions or thoughts on this bike, and make sure you stay tuned for the grand finale where we put this bike up against all the others in this year's shootout.